Morning, welcome to our sermon on Sunday the 12th of July. We're continuing our series in Mark's Gospel, and we're now into Mark 9. Jesus has just been transfigured and he's coming down from the mountain. And in 14 we pick up that story. When they returned to the other disciples, they saw a large crowd surrounding them. And some of the teachers of religious law were arguing with them. When the crowd saw Jesus, they were overwhelmed with awe and they ran to greet him. "What is all this arguing about?" Jesus asked. One of the men in the crowd spoke up and said, "Teacher, I brought my son so you could heal him. He is possessed by an evil spirit and that won't let him talk. And whenever this spirit seizes him, it throws him into violently onto the ground, and then he foams at the mouth and grinds his teeth and becomes rigid. So I asked your disciples to cast out the spirit, but they couldn't do it." Jesus said to them, "You faithless people, how long must I be with you? How long must I put up with you? Bring the boy to me." So they brought the boy. But when the evil spirit saw Jesus, it threw the child into a violent convulsion, and he fell to the ground, writhing and foaming at the mouth. "How long has this been happening?" Jesus asked the boy's father. He replied, "Since he was a little boy. The spirit often throws him into the fire or into the water, trying to kill him. Have mercy on us and help us if you can." "What do you mean, if I can?" Jesus asked. "Anything is possible if a person believes." The father instantly cried out, "I do believe, but help me overcome my unbelief." When Jesus saw the crowd of onlookers was growing, he rebuked the evil spirit. "Listen, you spirit that makes this boy unable to hear and speak, I command you to come out of this child and never enter him again." Then the spirit screamed and threw the boy into another violent convulsion. It left him, and the boy appeared to be dead. A murmur ran through the crowd as people, "He's dead." But Jesus looked up, took him by the hand and helped him to his feet, and he stood up. Afterward, when Jesus was alone in the house with the disciples, they asked him, "Why couldn't we cast out that evil spirit?" Jesus replied, This kind can only be cast out through prayer." Have you ever played the game Tetris or Snake? The game often starts out fairly easy and you think, "I can do this. That's no problem." And then it gradually gets harder and harder until everything is going so fast and you feel you can't cope. The premise of the game has stayed the same, hasn't it? Whether it's Snake where you're just collecting things, or Tetris whether you're building these blocks. But suddenly the game has got harder. Often when we follow Jesus, we assume following Jesus should get easier over time. But often it doesn't. Because Christianity was never meant to be easy. I think that's a mistake we make. Which is why Jesus talks about a narrow path, a narrow gate. It's why he talks about carrying a cross. It's why in Luke 14 he warns people to count the cost of discipleship. So let's go through the story. Mark 6. In Mark 6, Jesus has sent his disciples out earlier in the story. And they come back praising God because of what they've done in his name. And they have seen people healed. And they cast out many demons. And while Jesus has been up in the mountains, the disciples have had this boy brought to him. But unlike the demons before, they didn't seem to be able to cast out this demon. The path of discipleship was getting harder, not easier. So Jesus, Peter, James and John, they've been up at the mountain and they come down to rejoin their fellow disciples, but they are soon surrounded because there is an argument going on between the disciples and the teachers of the law, and the crowd surged towards Jesus. I remember what I've said before, the crowd are the unwashed, the unclean rabble. They're not respectable people. They're not religious people. They are just ordinary people, the great unwashed. And they are filled with awe knowing that Jesus is with them. And Jesus, of course, wants to know, well, what's this argument? What's going on? What's happening? What have you done in my absence? And this man steps forward, one of the crowd, and he tells the story of his son who is possessed. And it sounds like he has a fit, but it's obviously much deeper than that. There's a real sort of physical aspect to it. It does sound a bit like epilepsy. There are two dangers we fall into when we read this stuff. One is seeing a rational explanation for everything. Oh, it's just epilepsy. And the other is seeing a demon on every corner. Oh, it's not epilepsy, it's this demon controlling him. And I don't think we can make the conclusion that all people with epilepsy are possessed by a demon. I've got a good friend of mine who struggles with epilepsy, and great Christian person, but he's struggled with epilepsy. Is he possessed by a demon? No, he's just got this disease, which is epilepsy. But it's also quite possible that there was a spiritual dimension to this as well. So we don't rule everything out and just say, oh, everything's epilepsy. Also, we can't just say that there isn't a spiritual dimension. There's clearly, from this account, there is a spirit. There's something that is driving that inside this boy. There's something spiritual going on. I want us to think about possession. We've looked at possession before, and I want us to think a bit more about it. I've said before about how, we can be possessed. We met a guy in Mark 5 who was possessed by an evil spirit. And we can talk about possession in many ways. There are the spiritual, the spirits that possess us. And I do believe people can be possessed by spirits. But also we can be possessed ourselves. We can be possessed in terms of addictions. We can be possessed in terms of drugs, alcohol. We can be possessed in terms of a relationship or the dream of a relationship. We can be possessed by technology. We can be possessed by spending or gambling. We can be possessed by our own thoughts, fears, and anxieties. All these things exercise control over us. I think, going back to that idea of spiritual language, there's a great story of St. Patrick. And St. Patrick clears out all the snakes in Ireland. But actually, what that is often seen to mean is that it's a metaphor for his removal of the druids. There's the physical, they are the snakes. They are physically the snakes. They lead people away. So I think we can see possession both in terms of this spiritual dimension, but also things that possess us, things that take us away from our Christian walk, distractions, habits. And that can be, as I said, it can be chemical addictions, but it can also be relationships that distract us and demand our time. It can be technology, mobile phones demand our time. And I know that all full well. I'm not the best at putting down my phone when I should do. Spending, people can be possessed by going into shops and spending, can't they? People can be possessed by the stuff going on in their own mind, thoughts, fears, anxieties. What habit or addiction are you possessed by is the question we need to look at. So the disciples couldn't do it. Unlike them when they were sent out, the disciples cannot heal this boy. And Jesus' reaction is quite harsh. You faithless people, why am I stuck with you lot? And he's directing that not onto the Father, but to the disciples. Jesus being up a mountain, his glory had been revealed. And now he'd come down into the valley with a massive bump. A few years ago, I did a seminar with a group of graduates, and it went really well, and I was just feeling really good about myself, and I was particularly smug about how I'd answered some of their questions, and I was feeling, in a good space. And then I went into the loo, and I got myself stuck in the loo, and I have a real fear of small spaces, and I as soon as I'm stuck in a small space, I start to panic, and I don't think rationally, and I don't behave rationally. And when you're in that position, you don't think, I just need to calm myself down and just unlock the door. But I was beginning to panic. But luckily, after a few minutes, I stopped and I breathed and I opened the door and I got out. And it wasn't that the door was locked; it was just a bit stiff. And I went back into the room, and I felt really stupid. I felt really silly. I'd gone this mountain point of feeling really good about myself to this valley of knowing that I was really incompetent. And often, we have those troughs, those great moments are often followed by those moments in the valley. There's a great story of Elijah, and he casts out all does battle with the prophets of Baal, and then he suddenly goes into this real slump, and he can't seem to hear God anymore. Jesus doesn't ever sin, but he is fully human. He gets frustrated with his disciples here. He's had the glorious moment, and now he's back in the valley. Where have you experienced a great low after an amazing high, an amazing experience? So what happens? He calls the boy, and the boy immediately fits, doesn't he? And Jesus questions the father, and the man says, "Please, can you help him? Can you help him?" And Jesus replies, "Of course, I can help him." Jesus knows that he can help him, but Jesus needs belief, and he says, anything's possible with belief. And the man replies, and I think this is one of the great spiritual phrases that I know. "I do believe, help my unbelief." This is, for me, the paradox of prayer. And I am often praying in this way. I believe that God can answer my prayers, but at the same time, there's something in the back of my mind which is saying, will he do that? I believe, but help my unbelief. When this story is told in Matthew 17, so it's the same story retold, Jesus says, that's when he talks about only a mustard seed of faith is needing. See, Jesus isn't dependent upon our faith or the faith of the person praying for him. Healing is dependent on faith in Jesus. And it doesn't depend upon the degree, quality, or quantity of our faith. It is just about putting our faith in Jesus. I have no answers to why some people here get healed and others don't. I don't have an answer to this, and I struggle with that. And this explains my paradox. I believe, but help my unbelief. I know Jesus can and does heal, but often I fear that he won't. I believe, but help me in my unbelief is really important. It's an honest prayer. And that's maybe why Jesus responds to it. And the boy, instantly there's something happens to the boy, the body starts writhing again, and then he lies still. And people think that Jesus has failed. But Jesus brings the boy to his feet. The Greek word is einstim, which means rise up. And it be used just a few verses later, Matthew 9:31, when Jesus talks about himself rising from the grave. There is a symbolism here that as the boy, as something comes out of the boy, he seems to be dead, but Jesus raises him, because this is a symbolic act as much as anything else. This is Jesus showing to the disciples again what is going to happen to him, that he is going to die and rise. So next question. Where do you need to see a miracle in your life? Why don't you pray later on today, Lord, I believe, help my unbelief. And then we move on to prayer, and we're already on that topic. The disciples want to know, what are we doing wrong? We were trying to cast out this demon. They were probably doing it in all the ways they've done it before. And Jesus' answer seems in some ways very confusing, only by prayer. And I probably said to Jesus, but we were praying all the time. And sometimes I know many people who've sought Jesus or sought God in something and have really committed themselves to prayer. I wondered why this hasn't been answered. And I think the thing is let's go back to the start of the story. Where was Jesus? I have no doubt why he went up to the mountain. It was to get transfigured and have this experience, but I think he went up the mountain to pray. We see healings when we take time out to pray. Not just for healings. And I want to talk about that. Often we are too busy to pray. And Jesus took time out to pray. His spiritual tank was full. He was ready. And it's not just about praying for something, but communion with God. Relationship with God, to sit with God, to spend time with God. Is your prayer life a sporadic one or a patterned one? There is a place for both regular and occasional prayer in our lives. And sadly, often we leave it till late, till the crisis has come. Oh, Lord, help me. But actually, if we come from a place of already praying, then actually that prayer, that arrow prayer, is coming from a place where our spirituality, where our faith, where our relationship with God is in a good place. We need the pattern of prayer, and we also need the arrow prayers. When was the last time you spent a really good quality time in prayer? We do need those emergency prayers, those arrow prayers, but we also need the time and discipline of taking time out to pray. Is there space in your prayer life for listening to God? Do you take time to listen as well as speak? Or are your prayers more a list of things that you need God to answer and to do? We need both, but sometimes the answering is more effective when we're already in a place of regular patterns of taking time out to pray. What does your prayer life look like? So I'm going to view the questions again, all 4 of them this time. First of all, going back to that possession. What habit or addictions are you possessed by? The mountain valley moments. When have you experienced a great low after an amazing high? Thinking about, I believe, help my unbelief. Where do you need to see a miracle in your life? And finally, the pattern of prayer. What does your prayer life look like? Let's pray. Lord, help us to be people of prayer, to commit ourselves to you, not just when we have that emergency, but in the regular patterns of our life, breathing deeply with you so that when those moments of tragedy, disaster strike, we come to you from a place of good relationship so that we're ready to offer up our prayer to you. Help us, Lord, to believe. Help our unbelief. In your holy name, amen. Thank you for listening. Have a good rest of the day.